This was the real-life Shrek, and his story will make you cry. In the 1950s, there was a man known as Maurice Tillett, a reclusive farmer who lived deep in the marshlands of Louisiana. Locals would whisper about his terrifying appearance, with a face deformed by a condition called acromegaly. His grotesque looks earned him the cruel nickname Shrek. People avoided his land, believing he was a monster. But Maurice wasn't the monster they made him out to be. He was hiding a secret. One night, a group of curious teens ventured into his swamp, hoping to catch a glimpse of the ogre. They never returned home. Panic swept the town, and a mob stormed his land with torches, determined to end the reign of the swamp beast. But when they broke into his shack, they didn't find the creature they expected. Instead, they discovered a small child locked in a room, one of the missing teens. The real monster wasn't Maurice. It was the local sheriff, named Don Key, who had been using Maurice's terrifying reputation to cover up his own dark crimes. The twist? Maurice had been saving kids one by one, and hiding them from the real predator. And just like that, the monster was gone. No one saw Maurice again. He left the town, leaving the people to wonder if the true Shrek was still out there, protecting the innocent.
This American doctor was so evil, it will make you sick. In 1952, Orphan City, Florida, there was a doctor named Al Beback who was known as a brilliant surgeon, but he had a dark obsession. He believed he could unlock the secret to immortality. He found a patient, a young man with no family, who had weeks left to live. The experiment began. Dr. Beback injected a compound into the man's heart and waited. Days passed, and the patient didn't die. He seemed to stabilize. The doctor was happy. Until the patient began to speak. "You've trapped me. I'm still dying, but I can't die." The patient wasn't immortal. He was stuck in a limbo between life and death, unable to heal, unable to die. His body remained alive, but his mind was in agony. As the patient screamed in endless torment, Al realized his dream of immortality had become a nightmare. Some days later, one of the nurses named Anita Mann realized what Al was doing and reported to the police. Once they arrived, the doctor took his own life, and the last thing he said was, "I shall go, but I will be reborn much stronger." But that didn't really happen. He was laid to rest the same day.
What this man did to his wives was truly horrifying. In 1975, a man named Mark S. Mann had a shop where he made lifelike dolls and sold them for a living. Wealthy women would flock to his shop, enchanted by his charm. They'd fall in love, and they would marry, but then they'd disappear. His workshop in the basement held 8 glass cases with 8 beautiful dolls in them. One day, he managed to persuade a woman named Chloe Know-a-lot to be his newest wife. 3 days after their marriage, Chloe noticed something the others didn't. The dolls weren't just wearing wedding dresses. They were wearing his missing wives' actual wedding dresses. In his diary, she found his darkest secret. He wasn't just making dolls that looked like his wives. He was turning his wives into dolls. The process took exactly 13 days. The screams lasted for 12. Chloe managed to call and inform the police about her twisted husband, but when police raided his workshop, they found his final project unfinished. A doll with Chloe's face, only half transformed. But Chloe had left him a gift too, handcuffs. Now, Mark rots in prison, surrounded by blank-faced mannequins, and his dolls are in police storage. The last thing he had to say was, "I love beautiful women, but I love them more when they are quiet." This was the real-life Ratatouille, and it's truly horrifying. In 1962, Paris, there was a chef named Stu Pidasso whose dishes were praised as masterpieces. But what no one knew was Stu Pidasso had a secret sous chef, a rat named Remy. Unlike the animated tale, this wasn't a heartwarming partnership. Stu had been obsessed with cooking perfection, and after accidentally discovering that Remy could mimic his movements, he enslaved the rat. Day and night, Stu trapped Remy inside a small cage, forcing him to create flawless dishes while taking all the credit. The deeper Stu fell into madness, the darker his methods became. He began experimenting, feeding Remy ingredients that pushed the boundaries of decency, even using unsavory parts from local butcher shops. Over time, Stu's conscience deteriorated, and Remy's once bright eyes grew dull with despair. In his final act of cruelty, Stu planned the ultimate dish that would shock the world, a dish made from his greatest secret. The last thing anyone tasted from Stu's kitchen was the unmistakable flavor of despair. After his sudden disappearance, only a note remained. "Genius deserves a sacrifice." This lady married her dead boyfriend. In 1978, in a small town in Ohio, there was a woman named Linda Smith who was head over heels in love with her boyfriend. They had talked about marriage endlessly, but just weeks before their wedding, her boyfriend tragically died in a car accident. Linda was devastated. Her boyfriend named Lemmy Leaf was the best boyfriend ever to her. One evening, Linda couldn't take it anymore and she dug up her boyfriend's grave with the help of her two brothers. She announced she was still going to marry him. The townspeople were baffled, and some thought grief had driven her mad. Linda planned an eerie wedding party and invited everyone, wearing a white dress beside Max's corpse in a suit. Then came the twist. Linda didn't plan on returning her boyfriend to his grave. Instead, she decided that they will live together and have a family. All her friends and family saw her as a mad woman, but she didn't care. She kept her boyfriend inside a refrigerator and would occasionally bring him out for a walk. About 11 months later, she got pregnant, but you already know how she got that child. This was the real-life Homer Simpson, and it's quite disturbing. In 1969, before The Simpsons premiered, something strange happened in a small town in Oregon. A power plant worker named Hugh Jass disappeared without a trace. His co-workers described him as a heavy-set, balding man who was obsessed with donuts and worked in nuclear safety. But here's where it gets disturbing. Hugh's last day at work, he reported a serious safety violation. Something about glowing green waste being dumped illegally. The next day, his desk was cleaned out and his house was empty. When investigators looked into his employment records, they found nothing. It's like Hugh never existed. But in 1887, a retired security guard from the power plant finally revealed the truth. The plant owner, named Warren Peace, had been dumping radioactive waste into the local water supply for years. Hugh discovered the truth and threatened to expose everything. The night Hugh disappeared, security cameras caught him being led to Warren's office, but he never came out. 3 years later, his wife named Amanda Hugg wrote in an article how sweet Hugh was, and she later sued the nuclear company for approximately $69 million, but the court only granted her $6.02. This was the real-life Jigsaw, and it's truly horrifying. In 1984, John Spilsbury, a wealthy businessman, vanished without a trace, but when police searched his mansion, they uncovered something far more sinister. His home was filled with sadistic traps, spiked walls, poisoned locks, and floors rigged to collapse into pits of sharpened metal. Investigators found disturbing journals where John described his twisted obsession, testing people's will to survive by forcing them into deadly games. Over the next decade, 5 victims were discovered, each enduring unimaginable horror before their deaths. One man was forced to solve a puzzle while his body slowly burned from the inside. Another woman had to choose between cutting off her own arm or being crushed alive. Every victim was given a brutal choice: endure excruciating pain or die a horrifying death. Police suspected John Spilsbury, but they could never prove it. He was gone, like a ghost. But here's the part that will haunt you. Rumors say he's still out there, hiding in the shadows, setting new traps, watching and waiting for his next victim. Could you survive the real-life Jigsaw's deadly game? This woman is not as innocent as she looks. In 1974, in the quiet town of Little Stewart, there was a woman named Mary Juan, but she was known as Little Mary. Mary had a twisted hobby. Neighbors whispered that anyone who crossed her path mysteriously vanished. No one ever suspected her, until one day, a young boy named Jimmy disappeared after delivering groceries to her house. His family searched, but the only clue was a single grocery bag left on her doorstep. The police questioned Mary, but she was calm, offering tea to the officers. They found nothing in her home and moved on. But one night, a neighbor saw something terrifying. Mary was digging in her garden under the full moon, burying something. The next morning, a perfectly tended flower bed appeared in its place. Months later, more people vanished, always with Mary being the last person to see them. When the truth finally came out, it was far worse than anyone imagined. Mary had been using her victims as fertilizer for her garden. But when authorities stormed her house, Mary had vanished, and what they saw when they entered her bedroom was truly horrifying.